Welcome back, Deep Divers. We're diving into some listener-submitted stuff today, and let me tell you, this one is a doozy.
Oh, this should be good. I love a good doozy.
Right. So we've got a whole stack of materials about the JFK assassination. Specifically, we're looking at how the press covered the whole thing in the immediate aftermath.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, talk about a media frenzy.
Exactly. And the stuff we're going through, it's pretty wild. Articles, first-hand accounts, there's even a quiz, all from a research journal published by Dealey Plaza UK. They're a group over in Britain totally dedicated to figuring this whole thing out.
Fascinating. So what are we jumping into first?
Well, let's start with the headlines, right after it happened. It's like a snapshot of the chaos and emotion. Like the Dallas Times-Herald, they went with JFK ambushed in Dallas. Bold, right?
Yeah, it really grabs your attention. Like, whoa, something big just went down.
Right. Total stop the press's energy. But then the Dallas Morning News, they went with Kennedy slain on Dallas Street. It's just so heavy.
It is, yeah. So much more somber. You can almost feel the weight of history in those words.
I know, right? Makes you think about how different word choices could have shaped the public's perception of what happened. Like ambushed. Does that immediately make you think conspiracy?
It could, yeah. While slain feels more like a national tragedy, like the whole nation is mourning together.
Exactly. And the crazy thing is how fast these newspapers were putting out editions. It was like a constant stream of updates.
Yeah, the Herald especially. They really went all out. They even got an interview with one of the DPD motorcycle cops who was in the motorcade, Bobby Hargis, and they published it in their second edition that day.
Wow, talk about working under pressure.
Seriously. But I guess all that rushing might explain why there was so much confusion about the rifle they found at the book depository.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. You'd think it'd be pretty straightforward, right? Rifle found, case closed. But
not so simple, is it?
not at all. This journal points out all these conflicting descriptions. Some say it was a 30-30 rifle, others say a Mauser. Then there's a Japanese rifle, and even an Enfield.
An Enfield. That's more like World War I than Dealey Plaza.
Right. So how do you get all these different descriptions? It's like a game of telephone, getting more distorted with each retelling.
I know, and to think, even 40 years later, this simple detail of the rifle is still fueling conspiracy theories.
It really shows you the power of those early reports, accurate or not. So we've got conflicting reports here in the U.S., but what about international reactions? How did other countries view the assassination?
Well, it's interesting. The way a country felt about the U.S. really seemed to color their coverage. Like, the Czechoslovakian newspaper Rude Pravo hinted that the FBI and CIA were somehow involved.
Yeah, that tracks with the Cold War tension at the time.
Exactly. And then you have Red China's press going even further, saying U.S. ruling classes decided Kennedy had to be liquidated.
Very dramatic. Wow, that's quite a statement. Makes you wonder how much those initial reports, accurate or not, shaped the long-term perception of the assassination, even on a global scale.
For sure. And it wasn't just the communist countries. The Yugoslav newspaper Borba even said that Oswald's murder took place with police connivance. It seems like everyone had their own take on what went down.
It's like the assassination was a Rorschach test for the whole world. Everyone saw what they wanted to see, or maybe what they feared the most. But, in the middle of all this seriousness, some of these reports are unintentionally hilarious.
Oh, totally. Like, you can't make this stuff up.
Right. Like there's this one article that calls the Tippit shooting a shootout in a cinema because of all the shots fired. It's like something out of a bad action movie.
Oh, yeah. And remember the Chicago Tribune? They printed this whole Tippit account that's just riddled with errors. It almost reads like satire.
It's wild. But the most unintentionally funny thing has got to be how some Sunday papers here in the U.S. were already declaring Oswald guilty less than 48 hours after the assassination. One even predicted the death penalty. And, well, they were right about that part, but
Not exactly how they envisioned it.
it's just crazy how quickly people jump to conclusions. It makes you wonder if that same rush to judgment affected other parts of the reporting. Maybe that explains the whole rifle confusion. It's a basic detail, but they messed it up so many times.
Yeah, it really underscores how chaotic and unreliable the initial reporting was.
Exactly. We're talking about basic facts getting mixed up. That must have influenced public perception from the very beginning.
Definitely. And I think it's important to remember that this wasn't just a problem with the technology back then. Even with print media, there were ways to be more careful and accurate.
Right. It makes you wonder if that pressure to be first, to get the scoop, contributed to the confusion and conspiracy theories that still surround the assassination.
Absolutely. But, amidst all the headlines and speculation, this research journal also highlights some lesser-known stories, personal impacts that might have been overshadowed by the bigger events.
Oh, I'm always interested in the human side of things. What did you find?
Well, there's this article about Von Meter. He was a comedian who basically made a career out of impersonating JFK.
Oh, wow. Can you imagine having your whole act be about someone who suddenly just vanishes?
Right. It must have been devastating, both professionally and personally. The journal mentions a sketch where Meter, as an older JFK, is reflecting on a Kennedy dynasty, with Caroline even becoming president.
Oh, wow. That's eerie.
It is, especially given what happened to both John and Robert Kennedy.
Yeah, it's just heartbreaking. It reminds you that this wasn't just politics. It was a human tragedy with real consequences for real people.
Absolutely. And speaking of going deeper, this journal also delves into the Dealey Plaza UK Weekend Seminar. It was this gathering of researchers where they shared their findings and theories.
A deep dive within a deep dive. I love it. What kind of things were they exploring?
Oh, all sorts of things. From the crime scene mishandling by the Dallas police to medical analyses of Governor Connolly's wounds. Even within this group dedicated to finding the truth, there was plenty of room for debate and disagreement.
Which is what makes this whole thing so fascinating, right? There's still so many unanswered questions.
Exactly. There's this one young member, Kim Reinhold, who actually owns a camera identical to the one Zapruder used to film the assassination. He even gave a presentation about using it.
Wow, that's incredible to hold that piece of history in your hands.
I know, right? And then there's Russell Kent, who presented a medical analysis of Connolly's wounds. He was actually challenging the single bullet theory.
Oh, right, the single bullet theory.
Right.
That's the one that says a single bullet went through Kennedy and then hit Connolly, right?
Exactly. So even within this group of dedicated researchers, there's disagreement and healthy debate. It really speaks to the complexity of the event.
No easy answers. And it all happened so fast. Speaking of which, they also had a presentation on the perception of sound. They demonstrated how unreliable eyewitness accounts can be, especially in a chaotic situation.
Oh, that's fascinating. I'm always amazed by how easily our memories can be tricked.
Right, like they played a series of sounds for the audience, supposedly gunshots, and asked people to write down how many they heard. The answers were all over the place, even though there were only 3 actual sounds.
Wow, that's really eye-opening. It adds another layer of complexity to trying to figure out what really happened that day.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces keep changing shape. Makes you wonder if we'll ever really know for sure.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? But even without a definitive answer, there are still so many fascinating threads to pull, so many intriguing avenues to explore, and one of those leads us to a figure named Morris Jaffe.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. Who was Morris Jaffe, and what's his connection to all of this?
Well, there's this article by John Delone Williams in the Journal that really focuses on him. Jaffe was a prominent figure in Dallas. He had ties to Lyndon B. Johnson and a uranium and oil company with an office overlooking Dealey Plaza.
Hold on, connections to LBJ, a powerful businessman in Dallas, and an office with a view of the assassination site. This is getting interesting.
Right. And remember, this is coming from a research journal published by a group that's dedicated to digging deep into this assassination. They're not just throwing out random theories.
So what's the evidence suggesting Jaffe's involvement?
A lot of it is circumstantial, but it paints a picture of Jaffe as a powerful behind-the-scenes player. The article mentions his financial ties to LBJ, his history of maneuvering situations to his advantage, and even his potential access to the Daltex building, which some researchers believe might have been a second shooting location.
Wait, a second shooter? From the Daltex building? This is a whole new level of intrigue.
Right. And the article mentions that Jaffe's father-in-law, Sam Bloom, was in charge of public relations for Judge Joe Brown during the Jack Ruby trial. It's like 6 degrees of separation, but with the JFK assassination as the central point.
Whoa, that's a connection I wouldn't have expected.
Yeah.
So how does Sam Bloom fit into all of this?
Well, the article suggests that Bloom's role was to present Dallas as innocent in the assassination, to protect the city's image and prevent any backlash against its businesses. It raises questions about whether there was an effort to control the narrative, to downplay any potential involvement of powerful figures in Dallas.
That's a fascinating argument. It suggests a level of coordination and damage control that goes far beyond just a random act of violence. It makes you wonder how far this web of influence extended, and who else might have been involved in shaping the public perception of the assassination.
It does. And it gets even more intriguing when you consider that Bloom's brother-in-law, Mort Friedman, shared a telephone number with the Dallas Uranium and Oil Company, JAF's company, in the Deltex building. It's like every piece of information just adds another layer of complexity to the story.
So we've got connections to LBJ, a potential second shooting location, a possible effort to control the narrative. This Morris Jaffe angle really is a rabbit hole worth exploring. Where can we learn more about him?
The article cites several sources, including a book called Texas in the Morning by Madeline Brown. She claimed to have had a long-term affair with LBJ and suggests that Jaffe was deeply involved in the assassination plot.
Wow, a first-hand account alleging a connection between LBJ, Jaffe, and the assassination. That's explosive stuff.
It is, and it highlights how even 40 years after the assassination, there are still new discoveries to be made, new perspectives to consider.
It's amazing. It's like the JFK assassination is a well that never runs dry, always offering up new mysteries and challenges to our understanding of history.
It really is, and it's a testament to the enduring power of this event, how it continues to captivate and intrigue us, demanding that we question everything, to never settle for easy answers.
I completely agree. This has been an incredible deep dive so far, and I can't wait to see where this Morris Jaffe thread leads us.
Well, before we get too deep into that rabbit hole, I think it's time for us to take a short break. We'll be right back to continue our exploration of the JFK assassination and its enduring mysteries.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in a moment to delve even further into this fascinating case. And who knows what other twists and turns await us along the way. Okay, deep divers, we're back. And I gotta say, those Morris Jaffe connections are really sticking with me. It's incredible how this deep dive just keeps unfolding, right?
It really is. Like, there's just so much to learn about this event, even all these years later. And, you know, speaking of challenging the official narrative, this journal doesn't stop with Jaffe.
Oh. What else is there?
They actually delve into a theory suggesting the Daltex building, the one where Jaff's company was, might have been a second shooting location.
Hold up. A second shooter. From the Daltex building. I've heard about grassy knoll theories, but this is a whole new level.
Right. And the article, it lays out some pretty compelling evidence. Like, there are eyewitness accounts that mention seeing a puff of smoke or maybe a flash of light coming from the Daltex building around the time of the assassination.
That's interesting. But wouldn't something like that have been thoroughly investigated back then?
You'd think so, right? But the article argues that the initial investigation, it was rushed, maybe even incomplete. Like, maybe they overlooked key evidence that didn't fit the whole Oswald acted alone story.
So are we talking about a potential cover-up? Or at least a major oversight that allowed this theory to persist all these years?
Exactly. And it's not just about those eyewitness accounts. The article also points to some inconsistencies in the Zapruder film, specifically things that suggest the shots might have come from somewhere other than the book depository.
Yeah, the Zapruder film, I remember seeing it. It's grainy and all, but you can really see those crucial moments. What kind of inconsistencies are we talking about?
Well, there are a few frames where Kennedy's head movements, they just don't line up with a bullet coming from the book depository. Some researchers say those movements, along with the timing of the shots, suggest the bullet came from higher up, maybe a building like, well, the Daltex building.
Okay, yeah, I can see how that would raise questions. But is there any physical evidence? Anything besides those accounts and the film footage?
That's where things get tricky. The article mentions some evidence that was supposedly found, you know, bullet fragments, shell casings, things like that. And they didn't match Oswald's rifle.
That's pretty damning.
It is, but the problem is the chain of custody for this evidence. It's not clear, and some of it has even disappeared over the years.
Man, that sounds convenient for anyone trying to hide something, doesn't it? It just adds to the whole suspicious feeling around this case.
It really does, and it shows why it's so important to keep questioning the official story, looking at other explanations, not just accepting what we're told.
Exactly. That's what makes these deep dives so interesting. So we have the eyewitnesses, the Zapruder film, inconsistencies, and maybe even missing evidence. What else points to the Daltex building as a second shooting location?
Well, they look at the building itself, you know, the layout, the vantage points, how easy it would be to get in and out.
Yeah, but wouldn't there have been tons of security, especially with the president in town?
There was, but the article says that security was actually pretty lax in some areas, especially around buildings that weren't seen as high risk. Places like, well, the Daltex building.
So like a security lapse. A bunch of things happening at once that made it possible for someone to slip through and, well, do what they did.
It's a chilling thought, isn't it? And it just shows how vulnerable even the most carefully planned things can be.
Absolutely. It's a scary reminder that even with all the power and resources in the world, there are always weaknesses, always ways for someone to exploit the system.
And in a case like this, those weaknesses become breeding grounds for all those conspiracy theories and unanswered questions that stick around for decades.
It's like looking into a hall of mirrors.
Yeah.
Every reflection shows you something slightly different, and it's up to you to figure out which one is the real deal.
Exactly. And while we might never have a definitive answer, that search for the truth, that constant questioning and digging, that's what keeps this case so captivating.
Yeah, and it's why groups like Dealey Plaza UK are so important. They keep digging, keep researching, even after all this time.
They do. And it's not just about finding answers for themselves. They share everything, all their research and findings, inviting everyone else to join the conversation and try to understand this thing together.
That's what I love about this. It's not just about presenting facts or theories. It's about making people think critically, encouraging open-mindedness and exploration.
I agree. And sometimes the most valuable thing isn't finding the answer, but asking the right questions.
Speaking of which, I'm curious about those presentations at that Dealey Plaza UK seminar. You mentioned the one on sound perception, which was fascinating. What other topics stood out?
Well, one focused on how the Dallas Police Department handled the crime scene. The presenter, they basically argued that there were so many missteps and oversights, it really compromised the whole investigation.
Yeah, I can see how that could happen. All that chaos, the pressure, it must have been overwhelming. But what kind of missteps are we talking about?
Well, the biggest one was that the crime scene wasn't secured properly, people were coming and going, evidence got moved around or mishandled. It was just a mess.
Seriously, that's pretty shocking. That's like the most basic thing you learn in Forensics 101. How could they mess that up in such a high-profile case?
The presenter said it was partly because of inexperience. The Dallas Police Department had never dealt with anything like this before. They just weren't prepared for something as complex as a presidential assassination.
So chaos, inexperience, maybe even some incompetence, all contributing to the mystery.
It's a possibility. And the presenter even went into detail about specific pieces of evidence that were mishandled or just disappeared. Raises the question of whether crucial parts of the puzzle are just gone, lost forever, or maybe even deliberately suppressed.
Man, it makes you wonder if a more thorough, competent investigation could have given us different answers, or at least cleared up some of those lingering questions.
Yeah, it's a question that still hangs over this whole case.
Yeah.
And it really shows how important forensic science and proper procedures are.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that even with good intentions, human error can have a huge impact, especially in a case like this.
Right. And in a case as big and important as this, those errors and failures can echo for generations.
Yeah, it's like a wound that never really heals. Every new bit of information, every new theory just opens it up again.
It's true. And it speaks to the emotional impact this case still has, how it still captures our imagination and makes us question everything.
It does. It's like the physical wounds might have healed, but the mental and emotional scars are still there.
They are. And those unanswered questions keep pulling us back, making us search for answers, sift through the evidence, and try to make sense of something that just defies explanation.
And sometimes the most rewarding part isn't finding the answer, it's the journey itself. All the unexpected discoveries you make along the way.
That's the spirit. And speaking of journeys, are you ready to go down that Morris Jaffer rabbit hole? Those connections to LBJ, the Dell Techs building, that whole conspiracy angle, it's just too tempting to ignore.
Oh, absolutely. But before we go too far down that path, is there anything else from that Dealey Plaza UK seminar that we should touch on?
Actually, yeah. There's one more presentation I think you'll find pretty interesting. It focuses on a guy named Chauncey Marvin Holt. He was a former CIA operative with a long and, well, let's just say shadowy history.
A former CIA operative. Now, this is getting into some serious spy stuff. What's his connection to the JFK assassination?
The presenter argued that Holt was a key player in a conspiracy to kill Kennedy, maybe acting as a coordinator or a middleman between the different groups involved.
Wow, that's a huge claim. What's the evidence for something like that?
Well, they laid out this whole web of connections between Holt, Oswald, Jack Ruby, and a bunch of people in the intelligence community. They pointed to Holt's background in covert operations, him supposedly being in Dallas around the time of the assassination, and his links to people who were known to be against Kennedy.
Okay, I can see how he might fit into this puzzle. But if he was a former CIA guy, wouldn't he be really good at covering his tracks?
Exactly. And that's why it's so hard to prove or disprove this theory. A lot of the evidence is circumstantial, connecting the dots between seemingly unrelated events and people.
It's like trying to break a code, isn't it? Looking for patterns and hidden meanings to reveal some deeper truth. It's fascinating, but also really frustrating knowing we might never have the full picture.
That's the thing about conspiracy theories. They thrive on a lack of concrete evidence. People fill in the gaps with speculation, and it feeds that human need to explain things that seem unexplainable.
Yeah, and in a case like this, with all the mystery and unanswered questions, it's easy to see how those theories take hold.
For sure. But even if we can't definitively say whether Holt was involved or not, the fact that his name keeps coming up in connection with the assassination suggests there's more to his story than we know.
I agree. It's those little hints, those whispers of something more going on that make us want to keep digging deeper. It's like we're searching for answers, questioning everything we thought we knew.
Exactly. And sometimes the journey, the exploration itself, is the most rewarding part. Who knows what other surprises we'll find as we keep digging into this?
I'm ready to find out. This is already one of the most interesting and thought-provoking deep dives we've ever done. And with people like Morris Jaffe and now Chauncey Marvin Holt adding to the mix, I feel like we're just scratching the surface.
That's the beauty of this case. It's like a never-ending puzzle box. Each layer you peel back reveals new secrets and challenges.
It really is. And it reminds us that history isn't set in stone. It's a process of constantly learning, reinterpreting, and debating.
That's right. And with the JFK assassination, that process is far from over. There are still so many unanswered questions, so many loose ends, so much we just don't know.
It's fascinating and frustrating at the same time. The idea that we might never fully understand what happened that day, that the truth could be just out of reach.
It's true. But maybe that's part of what makes this case so enduring, so captivating. It's a mystery that keeps challenging us, provoking us, and reminding us that history isn't always neat and tidy.
Yeah, it's messy, full of contradictions and inconsistencies, and sometimes the best we can do is accept that ambiguity, embrace the mystery, and keep searching for understanding, even if we never find all the answers.
Well said. And as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into the JFK assassination, I think it's important to step back and think about the bigger picture, how this event shaped not only American history, but how we see the world.
Absolutely. I mean, the assassination of a young, charismatic president in broad daylight with so many witnesses, it shattered a sense of innocence and security, not just in America, but around the world.
It did. And it led to an era of uncertainty, distrust, and political turmoil that we're still feeling the effects of today.
It's like the world tilted on its axis that day in Dallas, and we're still trying to figure out how to stand up straight.
That's a good way to put it. And while we may never have all the answers, the process of asking questions, digging into the evidence, and challenging the official story, that's crucial for understanding not just the past, but also the present and the future.
Right, because this wasn't just some isolated incident. It exposed deeper issues in society and politics, forces that are still shaping our world today.
Exactly. And by studying this event, understanding its complexities, its contradictions, we can gain a deeper understanding of those forces, maybe even figure out how to deal with the challenges they create.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with a mix of emotions. Awe at the scale of it all, wonder at the mysteries that remain, and sadness for the loss of a leader who represented so much hope.
I feel the same way, and I hope this has inspired you to keep exploring this case, keep asking questions, and never settle for easy answers.
It has. And it's a good reminder that history isn't static. It's a conversation that keeps evolving, and we all have a part in shaping it.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to say goodbye to this deep dive into the JFK assassination. But remember, the conversation doesn't end here.
It doesn't. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep searching for the truth, deep divers.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.
We're back. And man, my head is spinning. All those theories, connections. It's like we've gone down the rabbit hole and there's no way back.
It's a rabbit hole a lot of people have gone down, Researchers, historians, even conspiracy theorists. They've been digging into this for decades, and it seems the deeper you go, the more you realize how much we don't know.
It's true. And this journal from Dealey Plaza, U.K., it really drives that home. All those alternative theories, the lesser-known figures like Morris Jaffe, Chauncey Marvin Holt, it just adds to the mystery.
It does, and it really pushes you to think beyond the official story, to consider that there might be more to uncover, more truths out there waiting to be found.
Yeah, it's both exciting and kind of scary at the same time. The thought that even after all this time, there could be pieces missing, connections we haven't made yet that could change everything.
Absolutely. And finding the truth isn't always about having all the answers. Sometimes it's about asking the right questions, challenging what we think we know, and being okay with not having everything figured out.
That's a good point. It's not about blindly following one theory or another. It's about looking at the evidence, thinking critically, and forming your own conclusions based on what you know.
Exactly. And with the JFK assassination, there are a lot of perspectives to consider. The lone gunman, the grassy knoll, the CIA, the mafia. The list goes on and on.
It's like everyone has their own version of the truth, their own way of understanding what happened that day.
And those interpretations are often shaped by our own beliefs, our own biases, how we understand history.
Which is why it's so important to be aware of those biases, to be open-minded, look at the evidence objectively, and be willing to question even our own assumptions.
Absolutely. And that's something I really appreciate about Dealey Plaza UK. They aren't afraid to question the official story, to really dig into the evidence and consider different explanations, even if they go against what most people think.
And by doing that, they're helping to keep this conversation alive, making sure the JFK assassination isn't just something we forget about, but a part of our history that we actively engage with.
They are. They're reminding us that history isn't just a bunch of facts and dates in a textbook. It's a living thing, something we constantly interpret, reevaluate, and debate.
It's like we're always adding to the story, uncovering new layers of understanding as we find new evidence and consider different points of view.
Right. And with the JFK assassination, that story is far from finished. There are still so many questions, loose ends, and hints of something more that we just haven't figured out yet.
It's both fascinating and frustrating, isn't it? To think that we might never truly understand what happened, that the truth might always be just out of reach.
It is. But maybe that's part of what makes it so captivating. It's a mystery that keeps us thinking, keeps us searching, and reminds us that history isn't always simple and straightforward.
Yeah, it's messy and complicated,
Right.
full of contradictions and dead ends. Sometimes the best we can do is just accept that, embrace the mystery, and keep trying to understand, even if we never have all the answers.
Well said. And as we wrap up this deep dive into the JFK assassination, I think it's important to consider the bigger picture. How did this event, this one moment in time, shape not just America, but the world?
Absolutely. I mean, the assassination of a young president, full of energy and promise in broad daylight with so many people watching, it was a shock to the system, a loss of innocence, not just for America, but for the whole world.
It was, and it brought about an era of uncertainty, suspicion, and political upheaval that we're still dealing with today.
It really does feel like the world changed that day in Dallas. And we're still trying to figure out what it all means.
We are. And while we might never have all the answers, that process of questioning, of examining the evidence, of challenging the official story, that's crucial to understanding not just the past, but also where we are now and where we might be going.
Because this wasn't just some random event. It exposed something deeper, something about society and politics, forces that are still at play today.
Exactly. And by studying this, by trying to understand it all, we might be able to learn something about those forces, maybe even find ways to deal with the challenges they create.
As we finish this deep dive, I'm left with a mix of feelings. Awe at how big this event was, wonder at all the mysteries that remain, and sadness for what was lost that day.
I feel it too. And I hope that this has encouraged you to keep exploring this case, to keep asking questions, and to never stop searching for the truth.
It definitely has. It reminds us that history is a conversation that's always going on, and we all have a part in shaping it.
Well said. So for now, we're going to say goodbye to this deep dive into the JFK assassination. But the exploration doesn't end here.
It doesn't. Keep those minds working, deep divers. Keep searching, keep questioning, and keep digging for the truth.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.